Render is a platform as a service for hosting various types of applications and services, just like Heroku. So if you're looking for Heroku alternatives, maybe due to the recent free tier cancellation or for some other reasons, Render can be a drop-in replacement. Let's see how to deploy our Adonis application to Render. The first step will be to create an account on Render. I already have an account, so I'm going to sign in, and I'm going to sign in with GitHub. So this is the Render dashboard. I've not deployed any service or application yet, and because of that, I am presented with a couple of services to get started with. So what we need to do is create a web service, which is where we will deploy our Adonis application. So I'm going to create a new web service. Then we need to connect the repository of the application we want to deploy. For you to be able to do that, or even see a list of repositories, you must have connected your Git account with Render. As you can see, I've connected my personal GitHub account and MizeLab organization. You can also connect to GitLab if that is what you are using. I'm going to connect the repository I'm using, which happens to be this first one, Stripe one-time payment, which is under the MizeLab's organization. So I'm going to click on connect. Then we need to give the service a name, which I'm going to call Stripe one-time payment. For the region, I'll leave it as the default. Then the repository branch is going to be main, which happens to be the only branch on the repository. For root directory, I'm going to leave it blank because it's not applicable to us, because we want to use the repository root directory as our root directory. Then environment, this has been detected for us and has been detected correctly, that is node. For the build command, this is where you specify the commands to install your application npm modules, how to build your application, in case your application uses a build process, which Adonis does, and some other build related things you want to do. And as you can see, we can specify multiple commands by separating them with a semicolon. I'm not using yarn, but instead npm. So the first command is going to be to install the npm packages. So npm install, then npm run build, to compile the TypeScript code to JavaScript. Then the command to start the application will be node build/server.js. Remember that the Adonis build process will compile the TypeScript code into JavaScript and store them inside a build directory. Hence why we are calling the server.js file from the build directory. For the instance type, I'm going to select starter, but you can choose any one you prefer, either free or any of the other plans. Then we can click on the advanced drop-down where we have additional options. So we can add environment variables. This will allow us to add environment variables one after the other. But we can also add a secret file, which will allow us to add environment variables in bulk. So the file name is going to be .env. Then I'm going to copy the content from the project. We don't need to copy all the content of the .env file because Render will define some of them for us, like the port and the node environment. And if you take a look at the env.cs file, you will see that those variables have been marked as optional. So I'm just going to grab from the app key and then I'll paste. Before saving this, let's update the app key to the one that we'll be using for production, because the app key is used for encrypting and decrypting tokens and sessions. So it's important that we generate a new one for production. So I'll just generate one on local, is generate key. Then I'll copy it and add it here. You'll notice that we're not using the correct DB credentials. We'll get to that later. But for now, let's save the file. Then we can get rid of this. Also, we need to make sure that auto deploy is set to yes, so that Render will automatically deploy our application every time we push to the specified branch of our repository. Then we can create the web service. So now Render is cloning the repository and fetching the latest update from the branch that we specified, which is the main branch. So now it's running the build command. First, it's going to do npm install, then it's going to run npm build. So the dependencies have been installed and the build is successful. So now Render is deploying the application. Finally, Render has started the application using the specified command. And as you can see, we got a successful message that the service is live, which we can access by visiting the URL that Render generated for us. Of course, we are getting 500 error because we've not set up a database for the application. And we can confirm that by looking at the logs. You'll notice that AdonisJS is trying to connect to the database host I specified inside the .env file when creating the service. So what we need to do next is create a database service And since this application uses Postgres, so we're going to create a Postgres database service, which comes out of the box with Render. So we'll create a Postgres service. I'm going to give it a name of Stripe One-Time Payment DB. I'm going to allow Render to generate a random name for the database, as well as a random username. Then I'm going to leave it at the default region. Then for the Postgres version, I'm going to select 14. For the instance type, again, I'm going to select starter. Of course, you can choose any instance type, but do know that if you select the free instance, the database will expire after 90 days and it will be deleted if you did not upgrade. So the database has been created. So here are the credentials that we can use to connect to the database. I'm going to open the other service in a new tab. Then go to the environment section. I'm going to update the database details accordingly. So the host is going to be this. The port is going to remain the same. The user is going to be this. Next, I'm going to copy the password. Then lastly, the database name. As soon as I save the file, Render will start a new deployment so that our app can pick the changes that we just made. If you look at the events section, we see that we have a new deployment, which is ongoing. So now we've set up the database, but we are not done yet because we still need to run database migrations as well as seed the database with some data. Though we can connect to the service via SSH and run the necessary commands there, but ideally we want the database migration to be run every time we make a deployment. So we need a way to incorporate it into the build or the start process. Luckily for us, we can add it as part of the build command we saw earlier. So if you go to settings, then scroll down to the build and deploy section, and under the build command, so we'll update this to include another command, which is going to be node build. Again, remember everything is inside the build directory /s, then migration :run. Then because we're in production, we need to force the migration using the force flag. As soon as I save the change, Render is going to perform another deployment. As you can see, as part of the build process, the migrations have been run. Now, if we head back here and refresh, we should see our application running fine. Of course, without any data, but it's working fine. We can sign up, we can log in. So next, let's seed the database with some data. And the application already contains some seed data. So all we need to do is run the seeder. Though we could do something similar as with the migration, but it won't be ideal. Because if we add the command to run the seeder as part of the build commands, it will seed our database with the same set of data over and over every time a deployment is made, which we don't want. Unless your seeder is idempotent, then you can do that. Since the seeder I have for this project is not idempotent, so I will need to SSH into the service and run the command directly. So there are two ways we can go about that. We can either connect to the service via SSH by making use of this command, or we can use the inbuilt browser shell that Render provides, which is what I'll be using. So I'm currently connected to the service. If we list the files there, you see that we are inside the application. So these are the application files. So all we need to do is run the seed command. That is node. Again, remember the compiled code is inside the build directory /s, then db seed. That was successful. If we head back to the application and refresh, we should now have some data. So that is how to deploy an Adonis application to Render. In the next lesson, we'll take a look at deploying to a different platform. See you then.